Advance Wars and Fire Emblem are pretty similar games on the surface. After all, Intelligent Systems developed both franchises. You might look at Advance Wars nowadays and go, oh, it's just a copy of Fire Emblem without the dateable waifus, and you'd be half right. The devs seem to think as much. According to an interview with Hitoshi Yamagami, who worked as producer for the first 3 Advance Wars games, one reason why there hasn't been a new game is because of how difficult it is integrating relationships into Advance Wars when compared to Fire Emblem. Which is fair enough, I suppose. Personally, I don't play Advance Wars for the characters. If I wanted to do that, then I'd play Fire Emblem. Which brings me to the main difference between the games, and that's the mechanics. Fire Emblem dwelled more in the RPG realm, with level ups, character stats, and promotion trees, not to mention the RNG. Oh, the fantastic RNG. Advance Wars, on the other hand, was unique, or at least different, and it focused more on strategy. This meant it toned RNG down to a minimum, standardized unit stats, with the exception of code buffs, and allowed you to produce units instead of giving you a fixed amount of units. This style of gameplay particularly appealed to the US and the UK, which is evidenced by the generally better sales in those regions. Despite the general positivity surrounding the franchise, sales decreased with each new installment. That is, until Days of Ruins entered the scene. Days of Ruin, or Dark Conflict depending on where you're from, was released about 10 years ago now, and judging by the fact that we haven't seen a new game in those 10 years, you'd think Days of Ruin ruined the franchise. Where are the colourful sprites, quirky characters? Where's the light-hearted portrayal of war? Where did this sudden change in art style and tone come from? Who asked for it? Well, as it turns out, you did. According to an interview with Gamasutra, Tim O'Leary, the head of localization at Nintendo of America, says the reason for the change was because of feedback from fans and the media. We like the game, we love the game, but it's the same thing, they would say. The devs' initial reaction was surprise. What? We're changing so much. But their changes were mechanical, not cosmetic. This made the devs take it all back to square one and ask, what is war? They eventually learned that their perception of war was way more lighthearted than other audiences, as you can probably tell from the first few games. As a result, they decided to take the Advance Wars formula and re-envision it to be dirtier, grittier, and more somber. This was achieved by limiting their color palette to brown, greys, and dark greens. The old world of Advance Wars was already established, so they had to make a new world. And then they destroyed that world with the meteor strike. Which was a smart move because meteor strikes seemed to have no wide-reaching global effect in the previous games. With a new desolate world to work with, the team started populating it with characters and defining their motivations, which then naturally led to the development of the game's story. So, for all that effort, how did the game perform? Well, judging by the sales and the critical reception, I'd say very well. Although the shift in tone was quite polarizing, there was one thing everyone could agree on. The balance changes were amazing. Old units were reworked, such as the battleships, which could now attack after moving, but have reduced movement in exchange, and the APCs, which can construct temporary buildings to refuel and repair friendly units. Most of these changes dramatically sped up gameplay, which is welcome in my book. In addition, new units were added, and this time it went beyond simply adding a stronger tank. This time, new units such as the bike and the duster were added, which filled in unique roles which we haven't seen before. In this case, we have the bike, which is a cheap scout infantry unit with high mobility, meaning it can capture buildings, as well as the duster, which is a jet that can attack both air and ground units with bearing effectiveness. And unlike the battlecopters, the duster can directly attack jets as well as copters. Personally, my new favorite unit has to be the anti-tank. It's an indirect attack unit with a fire zone that's nearly identical to the artillery, and it can counterattack when it's set upon by direct attack units. You might think the anti-tank is just better than the artillery, but as its name implies, the anti-tank is only really effective at taking down tanks, and occasionally a battlecopter. Want to shoot down that ship? Well, you're gonna need an artillery for that. As you can see, the artillery does more damage to ground units in general and can attack naval units as well. Every unit has its own niche role to fill, and there's a bunch of them for you to experiment with. These new units really changed up the way you played the game, as they opened up new options for you to explore rather than just relying on the same old tactics. Speaking of old tactics, in previous Advanced Wars games you might like waiting for your co-power to charge and then unleashing your devastating Super Co or Tag Co-power to ensure a swift victory. Well, I'm sorry to inform you that co-powers have been drastically nerfed, or at least toned down. Co-powers are now just that, co-powers like they were in the first game. Once you charge your co-power, you can use it to give your units a small buff depending on your selected co. However, that's not all that's changed. In order for you to gain co-power, you need to assign one of your units as a co-unit. This will level up the unit to max, and cause it to gain an aura, or a co-zone. Depending on your CO, units in that aura will gain a subtle buff depending on which CO you have chosen. Also, the co-gauge will only build by doing combat within this aura. The more co-power you have, the wider your aura will be, and that means more units can benefit from its effect. Sounds exciting, right? Except, by using your co-power, you'll reduce your aura back to its base radius. All of these changes to the co-mechanic makes the game more strategic overall, and I think that's a really cool change. Though I did miss raining rockets from the sky and getting 3 turns in one. Oh, and the leveling up mechanic? That's new too. In RTS games, units would gain veterancy as you defeated enemies, and this would improve their attack power and their health. In Days of Ruin, it works in a similar way. A unit will level up if it finishes off an enemy unit. Maxing out at 3, each level will increase that unit's attack power and defense capabilities by a small amount. I like this change because it gives you a reason to save units instead of throwing them away as fodder. It's a nice touch that makes you almost care about your units as much as you do in Fire Emblem. Only a little bit more. Before I talk about the story and the campaign mode, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the visual and sound design of this game. I particularly like the battle sprites in this game. They have this slightly realistic comic book effect to them, and I think it's a really nice effect. And would you have a listen to these sounds? It's a big step up from previous games. It's a bit more realistic and it's a lot more satisfying to listen to. Well, that's all under the assumption that you play with battle animations on. As for the game's story, it was pretty good. The Earth has been battered by meteors causing widespread disaster and wiping out 90% of the Earth's population. Among the survivors is our protagonist Will, who survived by hiding in a storage cabinet. I guess their furniture is a lot more sturdier than ours. As Will emerges from the rubble, he is attacked by bandits that revel in the anarchy that the apocalypse has brought them. But as luck would have it, our protagonist is saved by Brenna, the leader of a small band of soldiers. Having nowhere to go, Will joins Brenna in their quest to help as many people as they can. As they go about their journey across the newly baked Earth, not everything is as simple as lending a helping hand. The gang need to deal with unruly civilians, deceitful politicians, and old enemies with grudges. All of that culminating in the reveal of a sinister corporation seeking to profit off of the apocalypse. I enjoyed the story and characters quite a lot. There was a lot of exploration of human nature, both good and bad. We get to see how desperation drives people to do irrational things, and how quickly allies can turn on each other when food is scarce. I have to say, all that planning to make a darker, grittier game definitely paid off, because this is probably the most engaging Advance Wars story yet. It tried to do something other than, oh no, evil people are invading. We get the sense that death is a very real thing in this world, and that just makes the stakes that much higher. Well, for the story characters at least, I'm still gonna use infantry as fodder, and despite the darker tone, there were some lighthearted jokes thrown in to occasionally break it up. The campaign mode has 26 chapters in total, in addition to trial modes that unlock as you progress. These are harder maps that you can play if you're seeking a challenge, though I'll be honest, the main campaign can get pretty tough later on. This is thanks to the improved AI. Enemy units will now actively stay out of your danger zone while pressuring you with their own indirect attack units. This would normally be easy to counter, but the AI will body block you with their own units in order to protect their indirect units. This additional difficulty is great if you're a veteran of Advanced Wars, but it might be daunting for newcomers. This can be frustrating late game when one mistake can snowball into failure, meaning you will need to restart the mission again. The game's music is also a treat to listen to, featuring some rock tracks that really pump you up as you blow up enemy troops. I didn't find myself getting tired of listening to these tracks as I did with older games during long matches. There's just enough complexity to keep the music from feeling stale. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the battle maps and the map sprites. The lack of colour and variety just made the game dull to play after a long period of time. Don't get me wrong, the maps were well made, but visually everything just felt the same. So what about the other modes? Shops? Nope. War Room? Nope. Hard Campaign? Nope. Days of Ruin actually cut a lot of content that I've come to expect from past Advanced Wars games. There's still multiplayer and you can even play online, but there's not much in the way of post-game after that. Points you earn from missions are now mostly just for show, and while the single player experience is definitely a solid one, there's little incentive to replay the game aside from multiplayer. And that's where I think this game shines. Because of all the new balance changes to the units and the co-powers, this is arguably the most strategic and fair iteration of Advanced Wars yet. And that's why it sits right next to Dual Strike as my favourite Advanced Wars game.